Welcome to another episode of the Coaches Club podcast brought to you by halftimecuppa.com. My name is Danny Cook and I'm pleased to bring you another fantastic episode today featuring Ricky Machel.
That's the one.
That's the one. We got it right this time. Before we begin, you can of course catch up on any of the previous episodes on iTunes, Spotify, our YouTube, and of course our website as well. So, Ricky, let's introduce you. How are you?
I'm good, mate. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Not a problem. So, how have you been keeping yourself busy at the moment during lockdown?
I think, like most people, it's been a very trying time, and it's been new for everyone. I've been quite lucky with my role because I work with 16 to 19-year-old boys in a FE environment. So I've been really finishing off their academic years, which we only finished last week, and within that, engaging with the boys one-to-one, and my colleagues have been putting together some activities for them in terms of their physical work as well. So we've been quite lucky in that sense to stay busy during this period.
Yeah, and just on that, because obviously in terms of education, a lot of the things were up in the air, with exams cancelled and everything like that. How stressful has it been for you guys to actually put plans together and keep these guys on track and calm, I guess, about their future?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, to be honest with you, has been in keeping the boys engaged and keeping them motivated. So, it's great putting together all these programs and making them all razzmatazz, and that's all good, but at some point the novelty wears off of Zoom calls and quizzes and virtual classes and whatnot. So that's been the biggest challenge, and I think for us it's just trying to keep the boys on task of the bigger picture, in that this will be over at some point, and for our boys that are moving on to higher education or to employment or to other football ventures, to focus on that goal, and for the boys that are returning to make sure they're coming back sharp in the mind and sharp in the body. So that's been the biggest challenge, is keeping the boys motivated and engaged throughout the 3 months, really.
Yeah, I can imagine. Certainly around that age group as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's turn back the clock. Let's go all the way to the beginning of your coaching journey. If you don't mind just sharing with us how you got into this side of things, the coaching side of things, and why you decided to get in to coaching.
I guess there's two phases for me, really. I started coaching casually because I was playing. So I was kind of coaching on the side because it was kind of a natural thing to do whilst you're playing, and taking all the experiences that I'd had as a player and applying those as a coach. And it was only really when I got a really bad injury that the game was taken away from me, and then I started thinking about how I could remain involved in the game to the capacity that I wanted to, and that's when I really started honing in on my coaching journey. But I've been coaching since I was 16 years old, so it's been a long time, but I would say I've been coaching seriously now for about 8 years now.
In terms of you coming in and coaching at 16, what was it, as you say, was it the injury that sort of forced you into doing a bit of coaching?
Yeah, so at 16 I was still playing. I stopped playing in my mid-20s because of the injury. I was lucky to do okay in football, and I was able to work under some really good coaches who inspired me to go on and get into coaching. The injury kind of forced my hand a little bit. I don't think I thought about coaching seriously up until that point. I was still focused on progressing my playing career. Once the injury occurred, it was then like, okay, how do I now continue my influence on the game, because it had such an influence on me? And yeah, that's kind of how it all played out, really.
And was it a case of a coach sort of saying, come and have a go, or was it an internal sort of feeling that you just wanted to give it a try?
It was a mix of both, really. So when I was working as a sports development officer for a local organisation, and one of my colleagues was the head of QPR development, and he asked me to come in and do a few shadow sessions, and I loved it. And I'd been coaching prior to that, but at a very recreational level. And this was my first real coaching experience with good players in a structured environment outside of being a player. So he kind of opened my eyes to it all. And then from there, I kind of got the bug, and it progressed from there. And I really started focusing on, developing my badges and my qualifications, and understand the difference between being a player coach and then being a coach who's working with players.
And for anyone who's maybe unfamiliar with what those two terms are, what would you say is the characteristics of, say, a player coach or a coach coach?
I think from with your player's hat on, you're looking at the game with quite an insular lens. So you're kind of looking at the game from either your position or your area on the pitch or your job or your unit. I think when it gets to coaching, you're then thinking about how you're influencing the wider group as opposed to your immediate area. So I always played centre back or in holding midfield, and yes, you're kind of seen as the person who can see the whole pitch, but you don't really have an influence on what goes on in the wide areas or in the forward areas. And I didn't really appreciate the finer details of what those players are doing within the game because I was so focused on what I was doing. So it was only when you put the coach's hat on, two things really. You start to appreciate what goes on around the pitch, but you also start to appreciate how tough the job is for the coach. As a player, you turn up, you do your session, you have fun, you go home. The coach, the preparation, the purpose, all of those things that go into making a session beneficial for the players. It's such a bigger job in some sense.
And you mentioned about sort of catching the coaching bug. So for those who are unfamiliar, what does that look like, and what does that feel like?
I think it's a lot of things. I think for me, it's that engagement. It's the camaraderie with players, with staff. It's the ability to learn from other people, to inspire some, to be inspired. It's so many things that, I think it'd be impossible to talk within an hour about what the coaching bug is, and it means different things to different people. For me, I love that, and I think that's one thing that's really hurting about COVID is that daily interaction with the players. You can't beat it, you can't replicate it. Again, the Zoom sessions and all that's great, but you just can't beat the physical side of things. Seeing how someone reacts to an idea or a suggestion or a comment, or there's all the finer nuances to coaching that just can't be replicated. And I think that bug is so. What's great about it is so personal. What makes you tick might not make me tick, and what gets me going in the morning might not get you going in the morning. I think for me, when I first started coaching seriously, I think when I think back to times of working with players who really loved training, and at the time I thought, oh, that's what gets me going. But then I think back to players who I had to work harder to engage with, and you think, actually, that I kind of enjoyed that as well. And all of a sudden, that tick then meshes into a whole load of things.
Yep, and I guess, like you say, it's personable, so it means maybe something slightly different to the person.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, interesting. The next point I want to come on to is obviously you've come in. This is your sort of entry to your coaching pathway. I just wanted to find out if you experienced any sort of challenges in terms of breaking into the coaching side of things. Was there any issues in terms of trying to win over respect from players or win over respect from parents? Did you experience any of that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we're being honest with ourselves and we say that we've never experienced challenges, then we've probably never put ourselves in a position to be uncomfortable. And if you're not being uncomfortable, you're not really learning or developing. So I can think of multiple times where I've been challenged throughout my coaching career. Probably the fondest one. I say fondest because I look back at it now and it was a funny time. But I coached non-league football in my late 20s.
Yeah.
And some of the players were older than me. I played non-league, so I knew a few of the players. So it was an interesting dynamic going from being a teammate at different clubs to then coming in as a coach. So the first challenge there was earning my stripes as a coach. It's one thing to be respected as a player. It's then having those peers respect you with a different hat on. So the big challenge there was being humble and being humbled as well, and being open to being vulnerable to those players. To overcome that, I think I had to show that I warranted respect from them. Not I didn't feel like I was due the respect from them. I had to earn it from them. So yeah, that was one. I could go through. I mean, even when I met you at American School London, a big challenge there was coming off of the school had come off of a winning year. Multiple players had graduated, and I've come into a situation where there are players who've never played football at high or any level. Some of them, and expectations were quite high, and explain to the parents that we're going to go through a bit of pain because I'm going to try and implement a style of football that's very different to what the boys have maybe experienced. And getting buy-in from the parents was really interesting that year. So I always try and look for challenges in whatever form I can, in whatever environment I'm in, because I don't like being comfortable. Otherwise, you're not learning and developing, really, are you?
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I just want to touch on you mentioned about coaching players that were older than you. So obviously there may be a lot of young coaches listening in. Any advice to them in terms of coaching players that are 4 or 5 years and so on older than themselves?
Yeah, so I had two experiences. So two non-league jobs, one in the Southern Premier and one in the Spartan divisions, and both similar feelings of when you first walk through the gate. I think I mentioned before, I think humility is a huge thing, whether you're coaching older players or younger players. I think being humble in your knowledge, being humble in your environment, being humble to those you're working with, your peers, I think is huge. I think being in the moment as well is a big one. Working with older players, in non-league, they're not necessarily looking to be taught. They're not necessarily looking to learn. Sometimes it's stepping back and saying, do you know what? They just want to have an hour and a half where they're just being able to enjoy themselves. It might be completely different to working with an under 14. So I think just understanding that in that moment, it wasn't about me trying to show off a repertoire of experiences and knowledge that I may have. It's actually what's going to be beneficial for these players. I'm massive on American sports, and Greg Popovich, who's the head coach of the San Antonio Spurs, I listened to a podcast recently, and he spoke about being confident in your own skin and your ability. And what he meant by that is there's such a fine line between being cocky and being confident. And he was talking about if your expertise is at X level, that's okay. Just be confident in that X level. Don't try and be Y and Z in that moment. And it kind of goes back to the other thing I said about being vulnerable. And sometimes with the older players, it's saying, you may have more experience than me, you may have more knowledge than me. That's okay. I can learn from you, but hopefully I've got something to add to your experience as well. So that was a massive tangent. But yeah, going back to the original question, I think for anyone working with older players, I think the big thing is just a bit of humility. And sometimes accepting that it's their environment first, and then easing your way into creating your own persona and demeanor in that environment.
Great insight there. In terms of that sort of confidence that you need to put yourself into those situations where you are a little bit vulnerable, did you have any sort of tips, any sort of approach that you used that allowed you to maintain that confidence whilst displaying that humility and staying humble as well?
I think confidence, similar to what I said earlier, this confidence can be drawn from many different ways depending on the individual. I think for me, my playing background always helped me be confident, because I was confident in my ability to demonstrate, for example, or to draw on personal experiences of scenarios that I'm trying to portray within the session. I think preparation is big for confidence. I think if you can prepare to the best of your ability, you try and eliminate as many barriers as possible to being successful within the session. Of course, you can't predict them all, but I think if you can be as best prepared and planned as possible, that can definitely support your confidence in your delivery. And again, I think just being open. One of the first things I always tell a group of players whenever I meet them is, you've got 100% respect from me. You don't have to earn it. And I think straight away that tells people that they themselves can be vulnerable with me, and likewise I can be vulnerable with them. And I think that kind of strips away a lot of barriers and walls. And I think once those barriers and walls are gone, you can then allow yourself to really be who you are and who you want to be. And through that, I think the confidence starts to shine. So yeah, I'm massively waffled there. Don't answer the question.
Great answer. And in terms of that sort of initial approach to the players when you walk into a new team, is there a sort of set of non-negotiables that you sort of make clear to the players, or is it a case of with the help of them, you set a team sort of non-negotiable?
I think it's a mix of both. I've got my own values that I think are non-negotiables. Having high integrity and being honest and being respectful. You take that away from football, I think that's just me as a person. I'd expect that of anybody. One of the big things for me within football is to be purposeful. And one thing I always say to my student players is, I'm a massive believer in you can't, your form is not a light switch. You can't have strong form on the pitch but not in the classroom, or vice versa. So I always tell people I'm working with, I'm a big believer in what you do off the pitch is always going to reflect what you do on. And I always tell my players to hold me accountable to that as well. And I always ask for consistency. I think one of the biggest things I always say for people that I'm working with is, and I guess this goes back to being yourself, and I always use this analogy, if you're someone who struggles with punctuality, that's okay. Just tell me from the get-go, you know what, I'm really bad at keeping up with time. That's fine. What I can't handle is when someone tells me they're going to be on time knowing they're going to be late. So I always tell my players, just be honest with me from the get-go. And I know that's difficult for some people because you don't want to be vulnerable, but I always try and create an environment where players can just be open and be themselves, because I want to do that with them as well. And we all have our shortcomings. I think it's important to allow those to blossom, and then we can really start to chip away at the finer details.
Yeah, nice. I like that. And yeah, I, as you mentioned, the off the pitch stuff I think is just as important as what goes on the pitch, if not more so. I want to ask you've kind of touched on it a little bit there, but what the quality that you respect the most in the players that you coach?
I think there are a lot of avenues you can go down with this one. I think for me, consistency. I don't mean that in terms of ability or performance. I mean that in terms of application. I know that's very difficult when you're working with young people. But I think consistency in values and expectations is the truest measure of performance. So if I'm working with a player if you're working with young players, you're always going to get inconsistencies. That's just the nature of the beast, and that's fine. But I think if out of 10, 7 of those 10 you're seeing some form of consistency, I think that's where you truly measure somebody. And I think the great thing when working with sports people, football people, is, and I always say it to the players I work with, you have the ability to change that. So if for the first 6 to 8 weeks a player has acted in a certain way which may not be conducive to the environment you're trying to create, there's an opportunity to change that. And I think as long as people understand and are open to that, then that's always going to allow for development and also creativity in players. I'm also big on fellowship. I love players or just young people who are open to learning and growing with other people, and they don't have tunnel vision for in terms of being selfish. So yeah, it's not so much any specific football example. I would say I don't have one particular type of player that I like or particular skill that I like in a player. I do like variety and creativity in different ways. But yeah, in terms of the characteristics of a person, those are a couple of the things I would say that I really like in a player.
Great. And I just want to take it back towards your journey now. So where would you say was your first sort of serious stepping stone in terms of a coaching role? Where was that, and what was the progression from that?
I think my first serious role was probably when I was the head coach of a college team in London, in West London. And I kind of took over the program, and it was a bog standard college program when I took it over, and it wasn't taken very seriously. And I turned up for the trials where were announced, and I was told by a colleague, don't expect too many kids to turn up. So I'd planned for maybe 20 kids at best, and I rocked up to the session. There were 80 kids there,
wow.
Which was great. It was great, but it was, I know I keep mentioning the word humble, but it's so big to me. It really humbled me because it made me realize actually there is a culture here that wants to flourish. And the bigger challenge then was how do we allow that to be nurtured? And I think that was the first time where I had the ability to create an environment and a culture that I won't use the word culture. I didn't create a culture. I created an environment that allowed for the football program to be taken a bit more seriously, and the players had more of a platform to enjoy their football. That role kind of was at a time where I got the bad injury, and really pushed me and encouraged me to get into coaching more seriously.
So you was also playing at the same time?
Yeah, so I'd been playing conference football prior to that, and like I said, picked up a really bad Achilles injury, and I was out it took me 13 months to get back to fully being fully functional again. And within that time, I started coaching at the college that I'd been working at, and yeah, that's when I really got the bug. And also, actually, there was a player there. I won't say who it was, Irish boy, and he was desperate to do one-to-one sessions. He was just so hungry for the game. He was actually a Brentford scholar, and he kind of lit something in me as well, because his desire to learn encouraged me to do more in terms of planning sessions for him, and how can I encourage him within sessions. And yeah. So it was kind of everything kind of rolled into one.
Oh, nice. And how did things progress from there then? So how long was you there at that college for?
So I did that college program for a couple of years. Alongside that was doing the QPR development stuff as well, which was a bit more ad hoc.
How did you come across that? Sorry, the QPR stuff.
So I was doing a dual role as a sports development officer under Sport England. within these 2 college programs. I got involved in the football via that. And then I met the QPR development coach, and he kind of invited me out. And then from there, I got into non-league. I did my UEFA B license then. And then, alongside that, I've been doing some work with a guy who's now a friend and a colleague of mine, helping kids go to America on scholarships. And then he started an academy, and that's where I am now.
Brilliant. And the obviously we've spoken off air in the past about sort of the US scholarship route. Do you mind just sort of sharing a bit of insight as to the way things are going that way at the moment, and why there's more potential sort of UK players looking to go out to the US?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was lucky to go through that process myself and go to the States as a student athlete and complete my degree whilst playing, and it really opened my eyes to the opportunities that are out in the States. And although we don't operate that company anymore for various reasons, there are so many good organizations now that still support kids going to the States. And I always say to even my boys now at the academy, if you're not going to get offered a pro deal in the UK, it's the next best thing. You're living life like a professional footballer whilst getting your degree, whilst having a life experience that can't be replicated anywhere else in the world. The level of play is improving year on year. The quality of player that's being recruited globally is just becoming unbelievable. You know, we're getting full academy players now, international players going over to the States. It's just a really great opportunity for players to continue their development and life experience in a completely different environment they'll never be able to here in the UK, whilst getting their education as well, which is really important to me. I think there's value in it in terms of from a football perspective. You're totally out of your comfort zone. You're away from your family. You're in a different country. You're traveling all over a new country. It's an incredible experience for young men and women to get into if they can. And from a coaching perspective, you're getting to coach. You recruit your own players. You get to work with them 2-3 times a day, technically, tactically, video analysis. You are essentially in a professional environment in a very condensed period, but it's an incredible experience.
So am I right in thinking you've had the experience to coach out there as well?
Yeah, so I actually own a club now in Portland, Oregon, Soccer Chance Academy Portland. So we've been really lucky. We're now heading into year 2 of operation, and it's been a really humbling experience, but it's something that we're really excited about, and we're just so we're so fortunate for the response from the Portland community and beyond, really. But yeah, as a player, whilst I was a college player as well, I coached club soccer out there, which is the equivalent of grassroots soccer football here. And yeah, I think the big difference with US coaching and UK coaching is the kids are so engaged. I mean, they literally hang off of your every word. Maybe because the game is newer to them in some respects, where sometimes in the UK, the kids have had their own personal experiences, or their families have told them one thing or another. Out there, the coach is a very serious role, and that's reflected in the engagement with the kids, which was really eye-opening for me. And then also just the engagement with parents. The parents are so on board with sports in the States compared to the UK, generally speaking, which makes your life easier in some respects, and can make it a lot harder as well. So yes, it's a really interesting dynamic in the States compared to the UK.
Yeah, I was actually just gonna sort of mention that in terms of, you know, if a coach listening in would or has aspirations to go out and coach in the States, what is there any advice you would give them?
I think a big thing coaching abroad is the first thing is to have no preconceived ideas about what you believe it is you're going into. For example, I went to university in Mississippi, and if I'd gone there with preconceived ideas, I would have never got on the plane, because you hear all terrible things about the South and the history of it and whatnot. It was the best 4 years of my life. It was funny actually, because I listened to a podcast the other day with a guy called Cameron Campbell, who's coaching a Right to Dream in Ghana, which is an incredible organization. And he spoke about, he's gone from living in Scotland to a village in Ghana, and how, if you propose that to a lot of people, they would turn it down. But he's working with some of the best young players in the world, and how not having those preconceived ideas helped him adjust quicker when he got there. So yeah, I think not having preconceived ideas is a big one. I think not having ideals as well. So not having a set criteria of what you must have to be happy or successful when you go out there. I think, again, it goes back to that whole being humble and having a bit of humility, just accepting what it is when you get there, and embracing whatever environment you land in. There's big differences between living in New York and living in Idaho. But that's not to say that living in Idaho is lesser than the experience you might have living in New York. It's all down to what you make of it.
Yeah, it certainly is. And you mentioned about sort of having that experience to spend time with players you recruited, obviously talking in terms of the college level here, but what does any player in the UK that has aspirations to go out to the US, what do they need? Do they need like a show reel? Do they need a LinkedIn profile? What would you advise?
I think the biggest thing, first of all, and I say this to all the boys that looked, or girls that look to head out to the States, is they have to accept that it's a university they're going to. So it's great, if you want to go there and pursue your football career, but you have to accept that you are going to university, and you have to be very serious about your academics. One thing they're big on in the States is you're a student athlete, and they emphasize the student first. Yep. So if you're a young person who's not particularly academically inclined, I would review that and see if that's something you want to do for another 4 years, or maybe explore other avenues. In terms of actually getting out there, you need some sort of highlight footage. At least 3 games of you displaying your abilities in your desired position. If you want to go to a 4-year university, because they have 2-year and 4-year universities. If you want to go to a 4-year university, you need an exam called the SAT, which you can take at multiple locations throughout the UK. You can find that on College Board. If you just Google College Board, you can find all the details there. My best advice would be to reach out to some recruitment companies, and to do your research as to which companies you decide to work with. Ensure they're not just taking your money and running. It can be very daunting, the scholarship process, because there are hundreds and hundreds of programs out there, and you can't contact them all directly because you don't know what that coach is looking for, and if your coach doesn't know you, your email may just go straight to the bin. So I think establishing a strong network in the UK of people that can help would be one way. If you just Google, college scholarship companies, you'll see a whole host of them come up, and I'm happy to recommend if anyone wants help with that. Obviously, I'm not gonna badmouth anybody. But yeah, I think just doing your due diligence pre going to the States is massive. Another big one. Funny, one of my boys, he's at a school in Florida, and we spoke recently, and he just, even though I told him for 3 years, you need to prepare for fitness, he just said when you get there, the fitness levels of the American boys is just unbelievable. And it's very difficult to prepare for that here, but to be mentally prepared for that is a big one for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting, that one, actually. Okay, so looking back then, what would you say is the biggest challenge you faced within your coaching career?
I think the biggest challenge for me, I spoke about earlier, the different places I've worked at and how having different challenges there have allowed me to grow. I think the biggest challenge for me has always been the balance of being assertive and being a friend to your players. I think that's a very fine balance maybe a lot of us struggle with, particularly when I was working with the older players, finding that balance between now it's time to work, boys, and then trying to have a bit of banter with the guys as well. That's a very difficult balance to find, and it's very difficult when you don't know your players from the get-go. I think we all know if you come in too hard, you can switch people off. If you come in too soft, people may take liberties. So I think that's a fine balance in coaching. And it's never evolving one. As you get older and you change as a person, your personal values may alter, and the way you communicate with people may differ. So I say that's an ongoing challenge, and one that's enjoyable actually, is that balance between being assertive and being a friend and a mentor, etc., to your players.
Yeah, it's certainly something that every coach, I guess, has to weigh up and balance.
Absolutely.
And you just mentioned about sort of the values ever changing. I kind of want to link it into my next question, which is about your sort of style of play and your philosophy, and whether that's sort of changed over time as you've gone from team to team, or whether it's quite a rigid from day one. You've kind of felt this way, and it's just evolved slightly.
Yes, it's an interesting one, Danny. In regards to philosophy, I don't have a philosophy. I don't think I'll ever have one. I'm definitely bigger on my fundamental principles as a person and as a coach that may shape my philosophy in any given moment. We discussed earlier about the non-negotiables of respect and honesty and integrity, and I think those are my fundamental values and principles as a coach. And one of my favorite books is John Wooden's Pyramid to Success, and at the very bottom he talks about those fundamental things, and it's only when he gets to the top of his pyramid he actually starts to talk about he's an ex-basketball coach. He passed away. He talks about basketball specific stuff. So I think for me, my principles are what I value and hold at the highest. And within that, I think I mentioned earlier about having purposeful and intent from my players and from me as a coach as well. And as someone who played defense, having purpose in everything that our players do in their defending. So one thing I always ask my players when we're training is, what was the intention behind that? And if they can give me an answer, great. Even if I don't necessarily agree with it in that moment, if they can justify why they've done what they've done, that's great. And then we can discuss that and see how we can hone in on those ideas. So it's very difficult for me to sit here and say I have a philosophy, because I think a lot of the time it depends on the players I'm with. I idolized Rio Ferdinand growing up as a centre back, and I tried to play like him, and I was tried to dribble out from the 6-yard box sometimes, which my old school coaches didn't like so much. But for me, that was me expressing myself, and I'm massive on that. I'm massive on my players being comfortable and confident to express themselves, however that may seem. So in answer to your question, I don't like my players playing with fear, even if that means taking high risk, particularly at the youth level. I want, and that's something we're big on in Portland, is encouraging risk and encouraging creativity in areas where other coaches may discourage it, because ultimately, it's not about the result in that game. It's about that kid's experience and that kid enjoying themselves. And I don't think a kid enjoys kicking the ball up the pitch every time when they're getting one touch, as opposed to having 6-7 touches in a 1v1 battle. Okay, that might be near our goal, but that's okay. It's funny actually, Danny, because I remember when I came to ASL, and I was trying to enforce, and I use the word enforce deliberately. I tried to enforce playing out from the back, and the goalkeeper we had at the time, was a basketball player, and he wasn't comfortable with it. And I remember saying to him and his mum, we're going to concede a lot of goals, but that's okay, because over time he'll become confident with it and he'll become comfortable with it, and because of that we'll be able to win games. And I think the first 6 or 7 games, Danny, ASL, we lost. I think people were calling for my head. And then,
Not me.
but then eventually they started to realize, okay, I can actually now, it's okay for me to make a mistake because I'm not going to get chewed up about it. And they started really expressing themselves in our defensive third, and that allowed us to build through the thirds. And we had great success that year. And so in a roundabout way, I guess my principles in football are just to have players to create an environment where players can express themselves, be creative, and play without fear.
I like that. I like that a lot. And actually, again, this links really nicely onto what I want to ask next, which is sort of going back to your playing days. Is there any coach or any sort of aspects that you kind of picked up from different coaches and you've kind of used them as sort of role models for your coaching now?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been really lucky to work under some incredible coaches in the UK, in the States, in Brazil. And I think the easy option would be to choose coaches that I worked with at the semi-pro level and say why. But actually, the biggest influences on me were at youth level. The first one is a man called Len Toulson, who nobody would have heard of outside of the little Sunday league club that he used to run. He was a really old man. He didn't really run the sessions. He kind of just oversaw the governance of the sessions. But he was the first football coach that really taught me the influence of being gracious in defeat and in victory, and taught me about being level-headed. Don't get too high when you win and don't get too low when you lose. And he demonstrated that every week in training and in games, and that really stuck with me as a kid, and it's contributed to my worldview as a person. So he'd definitely be one. And then when I was 16 to 18, I played for Beaconsfield's academy program, and my coach there was a man called Peter Scott, who played for Fulham and over 300 appearances for Fulham, and he was just he was the best in terms of detail. He was incredible. No stone was left unturned with him, and he really taught me the true value of being a defender, and what that meant to the rest of the team, and being selfless within a team. And he really made me understand the why in everything I did on the pitch. I still talk about him today to a lot of my players, and how much of an influence he was on me. And he was someone, we talk about that balance between, being assertive and being a mentor. He was someone who just got it perfect. There were times we were scared of him, and there were times where we would run through a brick wall for him because we didn't want to let him down, and not because out of fear, more out of just respect and absolute admiration. And just the amount of time he spent on each individual always stuck with me. He knew everything about everybody. He'd always stay behind to do extras. During a session, he would come and talk to you one-to-one, and talk to you about why he did something. He was just incredible, and a massive influence on me and the way I coach now.
Wow, I mean that sounds incredible. I would like to be coached by him, that's for certain.
Yeah, I was very, very lucky, very, very lucky.
And just in terms of the first coach, was it Lenny? Did you mention?
Len Toulson, yeah.
Len Toulson, sorry. What did Len Toulson like? How did he demonstrate humility? How was he teaching that to you as players?
So we were a bunch of ragamuffins from out of the state in London, and he was just he just didn't care about anything. Obviously, he cared about you as a kid, but he didn't care about your situation outside of the pitch. Once you got onto the pitch, everyone was equal, and I loved that about him. And he would always, he was the first guy that really encouraged me to understand what sportsmanship was. And I remember we played in a cup game, and we were playing against a kid called Moses Ashikodi, who's a Millwall in England under 15 or something at the time. I can't remember. Nice. Under 16. And, we were all really amped about it, and we were ready to go. And we scored, and we all went mental. And I remember he didn't celebrate. And I remember asking, we lost the game in the end. And I remember asking him after, why didn't you celebrate the goal? And he said, because the game is more and bigger than just scoring goals. And he didn't like the way we built up to that goal. And I've got a really bad memory. I've got really selective memory, but that's really stuck with me. And it's funny because now with my boy, I don't do it deliberately. Maybe it was influenced by him, but a lot of the boys now, they always, you never celebrate our goals. And I'm like, I always celebrate if I feel like we did the right things prior to that. If we scored off of something that I don't feel like we worked on, or something that goes against our values and principles, then I'm not going to celebrate it, because that's not what we're here for. So yeah, going back to it, he just exemplifies sportsmanship. He'd always make sure that we, if we won, he'd always try and mellow down the celebrations in respect to the opponent. If we lost, he'd always downplay the significance of that loss in the moment. So yeah, really big influence in that regard.
No, that's great. And just on that as well, then a bit more wider question here, but what do you feel really makes a great coach? What characteristics? What do they need? What qualities?
What makes a great coach? I think for me, I think
oh, there we go. You're back. Sorry, I
lost
you there, Ricky. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think it's the ability to make the complex simple. I think that's huge. But I guess in the same token, it's the ability to not complicate the simple as well. I think that's something that I think in today's coaching world, one thing I can't stand in the current coaching community is jargon. I think we're in a time now where people like to belittle or make themselves feel more intelligent or more important than others because of words or phrases or slogans they can spew off. And I think the true measure of a great coach is the ability to transfer information in a very simple form, or making something very, very complicated very understandable for whatever age group you're working with. So I think that for me is a big one. It's something I'm big on. As a player, I don't want to be told about master's degree terminology when I'm trying to be involved in the session. I just want to know, what do you want me to do to be successful? And I think as a coach, that's a really great skill to have. I don't know if you listened to the Sean Dyche interview the other day on Jake Humphrey's podcast, and he just spoke so. It was just a great conversation. There was there was minimal terminology, minimal jargon. I find that very appealing as a coach, and I did as a player. Another great podcast is The Flying Coach with Steve Kerr and Pete Carroll. Steve Kerr is the head coach of the Golden State Warriors, and Pete Carroll, the Seattle Seahawks in the NFL. And they just don't talk X's and O's much. They talk about everything around the tactical stuff. And I think there's so much value in that in coaching. Just being able to understand it's more than, being able to put together a fancy diagram or, again, use complicated language and jargon.
Do you feel like that's something that has crept in, the emphasis on X and O's and going way too sort of tactically deep into something when, I guess, in reference to what you said earlier, you just want the kids to play, or you just want the kids to learn and make mistakes?
Yeah, I think there's a place for it, Danny. I really do. I think there's a place for the terminology and the jargon. I think it's huge at the moment, particularly within analysis. And as a sport, we're very new to it in comparison to basketball and American football, and even rugby. It's still something we're getting to grips with, and how we balance the use of analytics and our eyes. I do think there's a place for it, but I do think that the emphasis is becoming very heavy on the coach. I think the coach is becoming, the importance on the coach is becoming too big for me. It's never been about the coach, and it should never be about the coach. The coach should always be a facilitator for the game and for the players. And I think we're getting to a time now where we're placing so much emphasis on the coach and the coaching that we're taking away the essence of the game, in that it is just that, and it's a game and it's meant to be fun. Manchester United's academy have been putting out some great content over the last few weeks, and they put out a letter that, if you saw it on social media, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, eat sweets, play on your console. It's great. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, you want to encourage. I think as influencers and mentors, because we are that in the coaching world, we want to influence sometimes too much. Sometimes it's good just to step back and let kids be kids and let players be players, no matter what age they are. I think sometimes as coaches, maybe we just need to step off our high horse a bit and understand that it's just not about us all the time.
That's something I'm sort of weighing up at the moment as well, given obviously you see everyone else doing Zoom calls constantly, day in, day out. I just want to give the players a bit of breathing space. They're probably sick and tired of seeing me, so give them a bit of time off.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. And even that, you know, within the coaching community, you get the feeling of, you know, I haven't done any webinars today, or I haven't listened to a podcast, you know, so have I learned? It's okay to not do that. It's okay to, if you want to, you know, watch trash TV, crack on. There's no problem with that. If you want to eat junk food all day, you don't have to eat healthily. It's okay to just do you, and not feel guilty for it or be judged upon. Or if you missed Jesse Marsh's podcast the other day, that's okay. It was fantastic, but it's okay. That doesn't make you lesser of a coach. So yeah, I think the coaching community is fantastic at the moment. It's probably as strong as I've ever seen it, and I think it's a great learning tool for a lot of people, including myself. But I think there's definitely value in other things, and away from the X's and O's, like you said.
Yeah. And looking back then at your sort of coaching journey so far, what would you say has been a standout highlight for you?
Again, I've been very lucky to have quite a few. You know, when I was coaching non-league, we got to 2 county cup finals, which was incredible occasions for me as a young coach. Working with the high school kids at ASL, you know, working at the Southern Prem level this year, getting to coach in the States. To pick out one outstanding moment is difficult. I'll probably say I measure success in progress. I think my time at the Soccer Chance Academy London, we've been so fortunate to have not just good footballers come through, not just good students, but just incredible young men, and just seeing some of those boys who, you know, are very disillusioned with education or very disillusioned with their football because maybe they've been released from an academy or had bad teaching experiences in school, seeing them progress into university where they wouldn't have, or seeing them progress into the professional game where they may have quit. I think every year we just get those successes. And honestly, Danny, it's nothing to do with me or my colleagues. It's just, I'm just so lucky to work with great young people. And that's the standout for me every year. And I did a Zoom call with 2 of them the other day for 30 minutes. And I tweeted it out. It was probably the best 30 minutes I've spent during lockdown, because they're both now in America playing college soccer, and you know, one's in Florida, one's in Kentucky, and just 2 outstanding young people. And they're just 2 of many that I've been lucky to work with at the academy. So I'd probably say for me, the standout in my coaching is just seeing these boys progress. And I say boys deliberately because I've worked with boys mostly. Just seeing them progress in their lives as great young men is definitely the highlight for me.
Doing a bit of sort of self-reflection, what would you say is your strongest asset as a coach?
Um, I think for me, I don't think I'm a particularly great coach. I think I'm don't think I'm particularly great. Don't think I'm a great teacher. I don't think I'm a great coach. I think I'm consistent in my values and expectations. I think that's something that people respect when they're working with you, is just consistency. I'm the same day one with my players as I will be in day 200. So yeah, that's definitely one. I think in terms of my actual coaching, I think one of my stronger areas is coaching within units. I like coaching big pitch, but I really like coaching the units within those pitch. So, working with the back four, or working on midfield rotation in isolation, or working on third man runs in the final third. I like working in isolation scenarios within the game. I think that's a strong area of mine. I think one of my other strong points is encouraging players to focus on what they can do as opposed to focusing on what they can't. I think as humans we tend to focus on what we can't do, and that sometimes creates a lack of clarity on what we can do. With Peter Scott, going back to him, at the time, being a ball playing centre back wasn't very fashionable as it is now. And he always encouraged me to do that. And I always remember that. And that's something I always do with my players. I always tell them, listen, this is what you're very good at, so focus on that. The things you need to work on, we can do that. But that's not what makes you a great player. And I think that's something that is a strength of mine, amongst multiple weaknesses, by the way. That's not me trying to egg myself up at all.
Well, I'm sure many people would disagree in terms of you saying you're not a good coach. So,
I don't know about that. Might have a few players that might disagree with that.
Moving on, what, if any, advice would you have for a young coach or a coach new to the game looking to pursue the game further? Do you have any advice for them at all?
Yeah, I think with the game of football in particular, it's such a sport that runs on emotion and ebbs and flows. I think any young coach coming in, I think it's good to anticipate dips and to embrace those dips, because they are inevitable. There are going to be times where you put on a session and it's awful. We've all been there. Where you plan a session, you think that's unbelievable, and you get out there and it's probably the worst thing you've ever seen, and the players hate it, you hate it, you just want to stop it. I think that's okay. I think I know I keep using the same words, but I think they're really important. I think it's okay. I did a session, a couple of years ago at Soccer Chance Academy. We had, I mean, for me, I can't speak on anyone else's behalf, it was the best group of footballers I've ever worked with. 5 of that group went on to sign professional contracts. And I remember putting a session on, it was rubbish. And I just stopped it and I just said to the boys, honestly, this is just not working. And I changed it. And that was the first time I'd ever done that, because prior to that, I'd always viewed that as a sign of weakness, as in, I can't change the session because that shows them that I don't know what I'm doing. And I think that actually broke down a lot of barriers with those players, because it made them realize that I don't think I'm perfect. And the same thing with my teaching. I think if you're a coach who can get experience teaching in some capacity, I would 100% recommend it. It's been the best thing that's ever happened to me as a coach. It changes the way you communicate with people. It helps you to break down information into digestible clumps. Even if that means you're just shadowing in a school, or shadow. Even sometimes, there are some coaches who are great teachers. I was really lucky enough to do a site visit to Valencia a couple of years ago, and I got all access to the club from U6 up to the first team. And one of their things there is, when they're hiring coaches, in the UK, the first thing they ask you, what's your qualification? If you've got a B license, level 2, whatever. At Valencia, the first thing they want to know is, do you have a teaching qualification? Because they believe that if you're a good teacher, you can be taught how to coach football. And their coaches are incredible. Their alumni of players produced is phenomenal. So yeah, going back to that, if young coaches can get experience viewing teachers and how they engage with young people, I would, and that can be in any environment. That could be a teacher teaching the guitar, teaching foreign language, teaching math, whatever it may be. I think it's a really valuable tool. And then just being open to those dips and accepting those as part of the process. And again, not getting too high on success. Success is always temporary, as are those dips. So just trying to be as level keel as possible.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. I guess I kind of want to just ask off the back of that, have you had any sort of troubles when you've gone from teaching to then having to go out onto the pitch and train these guys?
Not personally at the academy, because I keep the two very separate. Even though I demand the same off the boys in terms of their application. I think me as a teacher and me as a coach is two different approaches. Although my values can transfer across the two, on the pitch you may have to communicate differently to get a point across than I would in the classroom. I would say in the classroom I'm very, very, very discussion based. My boys will tell you we've had some classes where we've not actually done any of the class. We've just talked for an hour and a half because that was what was right at the time. And
sounds like the best type of classes. I'm up for them.
Yeah, well, for them it was great because they're not doing anything,
Yeah.
But it was funny because when I spoke to the two boys, that was actually something one of them mentioned, that some of his fondest memories were, us being in class and talking about politics or religion or race or whatever it may be. It had nothing to do with education, it had nothing to do with football, but it just challenged the boys to think a little bit differently. And I think our job as mentors and as influencers is to do that, is to encourage different types of thought processes with our young players, because in turn that's going to encourage them to think differently about the game. And again, as a coach, the teachings encourage me to look at the way I deliver my content. So maybe being less structured in my sessions. One of the co-founders of SCA Portland, he's a massive fan. His name's Joe Smith. He's a massive fan of Dan Machichi, who's been one of the biggest influences in English football, Coach Dele Alli and whatnot. And he will tell you all about Dan Machichi all day. But he is massive on no structure in sessions, in terms of if you go out to deliver, if you've got in your head that we're going to work on playing out from the back today, and then mid-session actually you realise that the group may be struggling with vacating space or occupying space, then you focus on that. Or if halfway through that you realise that the players are struggling with their passing and receiving, you may change the focus to that. Because, and this is something that he's big on and something that I totally agree with, that session plan is about you. Although your intentions may be about the players, the plan itself was designed by you. If midway through the players require something else, it's always about the player. So you have to be adaptable and change to that. So yeah, teaching and coaching can be separate, but I think the two have huge transferable qualities, and I think being adaptable and adjustable to any given time and scenario is huge.
Great response there. So final two questions, Ricky. I'm wary of your time. I don't want to keep you for too much longer.
No, I love it, mate. Enjoy it.
Thank you. So talking about lockdown, I know we briefly spoke about it at the start, but is there anything you've done during lockdown to help your coaching from a personal development point of view?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, I draw a lot of inspiration from other sports. I'm a huge basketball fan, always have been since a kid, and American football since I lived there, and rugby and whatnot. And prior to COVID, I'd actually done 2 really great site visits. One with Ealing Trailfinders Rugby Club, who play the league below. Club. Yeah, really great club.
Great club.
And I got to spend the day there with their coaches and their players. And I got to do another visit with a Barking Academy, basketball academy in East London, and the U16 GB basketball coach there, and just been following up with that really in terms of basketball and rugby coaching approaches. And anyone that knows me knows how big I am on transferable skills between the sports. I think it's just endless, and I think we're as a sport, I think we're quite naive and ignorant to the great things that are going on in other sports a lot of the time. So yeah, I think I've spent a lot of time looking at how basketball in particular, because I love it so much, how can my love for basketball and the things they do influence my coaching. And I've been really craving to find football examples of my feelings, and I was really lucky to come across Holstein Kiel, and I've probably just battered their name. It's a German club, but their U19s team play a really fluid, expansive brand of football, which really, to me, replicates basketball in many senses. And I've been watching a lot of their stuff, and through a lot of friends that work in basketball, I've been watching a lot of European basketball, because they're quite unique in their approaches to the game, as opposed to American, which is a bit more athletic and rigid, generally speaking. Looking at how they, using things like pick and roll in basketball, how can that be used in the set piece in football, and the fast break, and how does a basketball team run a fast break, and how can that be influenced within football? And futsal obviously is a huge component of that as well. So I think I've been using this time to really hone in on the transferable skills between other sports and how that can influence my coaching ability.
Yeah, I like that. And obviously the Last Dance documentary as well.
Yeah. Do you know what's really great about that? And I tweeted this out as well recently, is it's been really cool to see people that don't have any care for basketball engaged in the sport. And it's been cool to have conversations with people that usually, would have no interest in basketball. I'm no basketball expert. I love the sport, and I'll chew your ear off about it, ear hole off about it as much as I can. But I'm not an expert on it. But it's been great to, friends ask questions about the game, and different types of players, and why did this happen, and why did this guy do this, and that's been really cool. And also, just people that don't like sport have engaged in it, and I'm all for any form of sport that engages people into larger discussions, which that documentary did.
Yeah, and I share with you, I think, the transferable element of certain sports, and especially basketball. I was very fortunate to do a bit of coaching of that this year, and like yourself, I won't say I'm a basketball expert or anything like that, but it was interesting because I actually remember copying a basketball session and just applying it to football and just adapting it. And it was all transition work, and I really like how quick and up and down the basketball game is, really.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, that brings us on to our final question. So Ricky, I know it's hard to look ahead now, but sort of 5-10 years down the line, where do you want to be? Where do you imagine yourself being?
Well, geographically, I'll probably be in the States, more than likely. To continue to grow our club is a big priority. we're not interested in being a big club in terms of numbers. We are interested in being a leader in affecting the US soccer landscape. And we've done that by drawing influences and inspiration from multiple clubs that we respect around the world and coaches that we respect. And that's a huge priority of mine and ours in the bigger picture. Personally, I see myself working hopefully in the U23 area in some capacity long term. I really like that age group between 16 and 24. I still think there's a lot of development to be done there and a lot of influencing that can be had. And I like that age group because it's very competitive, but there's still an element of development to it. So yeah, definitely see myself within this. Well, I'd like to work in some sort of U23 capacity, maybe. And yeah, just hopefully continuing to be inspired and inspire hopefully a few along the way and continue a love for the game and to give back to the game that gave me everything. And I know that sounds corny, but it really did. So yeah.
No, brilliant. Well, fingers crossed and hope for the best that happens. I'm sure it will.
Appreciate it.
Not a problem. So that brings us to the end of today's show. Ricky, how can anyone listening in follow you on social media?
At Ricky Machel, RICKYMACHEL on Twitter. There you'll see my sports fandom at its fullest. So yeah, that's the easiest way.
Brilliant. And for Soccer Chance?
Soccer Chance Academy. The link is on that Twitter page as well. If you go at SCA Portland, and then for the London one is at ACAD_SC, and you'll see all the work we're doing. And we've also got an Instagram page as well, SCA Portland, where we're frequently putting up clips of our teams and players and what we believe to be our club's identity, and hopefully it shines through in those clips.
Brilliant. Go and check that one out. So yeah, you can of course follow Halftime Cuppa on Twitter using our handle at halftime_cuppa, and my personal account is at DannyCook1996 should you wish to follow. As mentioned at the start of the show, all previous episodes are available to catch up on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and our website at halftimecuppa.com. Thanks again, Ricky, for coming on. I appreciate you giving up your time.
Really appreciate it, Dan. It's been really enjoyable, and keep up the good work, and hopefully we can touch base soon.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Anyway, take care, Ricky, and
Cheers.
Until next time, stay safe, everyone, and goodbye.